Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Abbey Research Reads. I am Dr. Kristen Donnelly. Here at Abbey Research, we are empathy educators who are passionate about exploring all elements of culture, both popped and lived, and figuring out how we can engage with stories different than our own to increase our empathy, our emotional intelligence, our inclusivity in how we think about the world. And one of the ways we do it is through this series, which is books about various things that make us think, both fiction and nonfiction, from a variety of perspectives. Today, I'd like to talk to you about legit one of my favorite YA books I've read in a hot minute, probably since Darius the Great is Not Okay, which I've reviewed on this channel, called Felix Ever After. It's a 2020 release by an incredibly award-winning author in the YA space named Kacen Callender, who is, according to the bio, a Black, queer, trans author who uses they, them pronouns and he, him pronouns. And so I will, in this particular video, use they, them, since that's their primary requested, like it's the one that's listed first kind of everywhere. So a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to somebody on a podcast, and they very, very transparently and honestly were like, I don't understand why we need so many labels. I don't understand why we need so many letters. I don't understand why LGBT can't just stay there. Like, why do we need queer and all those other things? And this person was very, very admittedly simply curious. And I was happy to answer. And actually, what came to mind while I was answering the question was this book. And my answer is that humans are not really boxed creatures. We all inhabit a whole lot of things. And so very, very often, certain identities that may make sense for somebody don't make sense for somebody else. And as we continue to allow people to experience their full selves, and to say out loud, hey, this thing that I was identifying as is kind of itchy and I don't really like it anymore, the more society allows that, yeah, we are going to get more letters and we are going to get more words that may or may not make sense to you or you may or may not identify with. But the really important thing is that the person using it identifies. This book explores that. So Felix is trans and is in high school. And that's controversial for sure. I definitely hear a lot of people saying that students shouldn't have surgery in high school. That's not my personal opinion, but that is definitely the opinion out there flying around. But Felix had surgery, a top surgery, and is in a very kind of progressive creative school that is for art and for really kind of like artistic geniuses. And at the beginning of the story, we know a couple things. We know that he no longer speaks to his mother. We know, and it's kind of hinted that it's because he's trans. We know that his father is really struggling with the idea that he is trans and how to interact with Felix post-transition. For instance, the father will still use female pronouns or talk about my little girl, things like this. But the real activating entity of the plot is that Felix walks into school one day and sees an essentially a framed, somebody has printed his old Instagram and framed it all over the lobby and dead named him. Now, if you're not familiar with the term dead naming, it's when somebody post transition, when somebody comes out as trans and says, this is who I am now, I am not that person. Using that person name is called dead naming. And it's incredibly traumatic because you're not that person anymore. You've said you're not that person anymore. That's not how you identify. That's not your gender. That's not your life. You don't want, that's not okay. So dead naming is an intentional traumatic attack on a trans person. So Felix wigs out, which he totally should. And the book kind of takes off from there. And it's the investigation of who dead named him. It's a lot of very, very typical teenage drama, teenage assumptions. But one of the things that I really appreciated about this book is that Felix has come out as trans and is still not totally comfortable with that word or that identity. It still itches him. He doesn't want to not be trans, but he doesn't think that that's the right word for his full sense of self. So most of the book is, yes, a lot about this investigation into the bully, a lot about how he interacts with his parents, which is very, very typical of queer YA, and a lot about that. But what I loved the most was this, I know that word doesn't fit, and I'm going to find a word that fits, and I'm going to find the thing that feels that feels at home, and he does. He does at the end. And I don't want to spoil that for you because I want you to go on the journey with him. And I really love how he explains it. Now, as the adulty reading this person, I tend to always wish that we could give parents a little bit more space to be, I don't know what's going on in YA books, but if I was a teenager, I wouldn't want to give them that space either. So it's an authentic teenage experience to be like, no, my parents are dumb. Now that's in terms of, in this book, his father, not his mother. Felix's mother's reaction to his transition is to ignore him, essentially. And that's just gut-wrenching, heartbreaking. His father is trying. And I'm glad they get around to that point at the end of the book. That is a spoiler I will give you, because there's a lot of trauma that Felix happens through in this book. And I don't want you to think that we end the book with his father continuing to impact either intentional or accidental trauma. Anyway, if you're somebody who does not know a trans person in real life, which is a lot of people I encounter, if you are somebody who has never really thought about labels beyond LGBT and Q, if you've never kind of entertained these ideas, I honestly cannot recommend Felix Ever After enough. It's also just a really sweet love story, and a whole lot about, I'm just so thankful I'm not a teenager right now. I'm just so thankful I'm not a teenager in the age of TikTok. You guys are so brave and doing great work. But anyway, I loved this book. I really did. And I recommend it highly as not only an empathy read, but just a really lovely love story. That's it for me from now. Again, I'm Dr. Kristen, and this has been Abbey Research Reads. I highly recommend Felix Ever After by Kacen Callender.